Misha here, and we're kind of picking up where we left off. Last time we looked at the switch from AKM to AK74 and AK74S. Didn't really touch upon the RPK74 in that video because I was kind of saving it for this one. We're going to talk about the Modernized series that appeared incrementally between about 91 and 2000 as changes updated. Of course, featuring my Mishaco Saiga SGL3194. Able to shoot this because found some wolf ammo and deep storage for you guys. I've been asking for your extra support this season, so I've been literally digging deep to try to get back to, and I know you like AK stuff. And then yeah, we'll talk about the RPK74 and 74M because there's not just a ton of difference between those and the original RPKS with my Russian Molat Vepa FM RPK74. Rather aptly named. And, you know, I wish more of these had come in, but sanctions happened. I guess I am happy some made it in before that, but at least we did actually get a good number of Saigas and even quite a fair number of SGL 21s and 31s. So we'll talk about that. Modern military use and kind of the status of AK-74 type guns on the market today. And, you know, about 5 years ago, did a video saying the 545 bullet cartridge is effectively dead in America. Do I still feel that way? Or has it made a resurgence? Is it going to? Or is it still dead and never coming back? We'll talk about all that. And as always, please do like, share, and subscribe. Share your own 545 guns in the comments. If you'd like to do a super thanks here on YouTube, that'd be appreciated. You can also visit the Patreon page. With no further ado, let's pick up where we left off last time with essentially the fall of the USSR and the formation of a new nation state, Russia. She's getting warm, but that's kind of what these are meant for. Could also be that it's in the 80s and it's October. Or both. Mishaco, soon to become Izhmash, would greatly increase production for the Afghan war. Tula, they would as well, but they focused on things like the AKS-74U. And while one would weather the fall of the USSR, the other would not. Tula would be gone just a couple of years later. So 1990, 1991, these were the standard guns. Most infantry had the fixed stock AK-74, known as the 6P20 by the Gras Index. Originally wood furniture, later the plum synthetic would come into use. And for specialist forces, from the outset, the 6P21, the AKS-74 folding stock version, was introduced. This would go to the VDV, paratrooper types, airborne types. It would be used, especially before the Crink was really up and running, as a PDW by helicopter drivers and vehicle convoy guys. Some police and Marines would have them as well. In the beginning, it seems like, and this is just a rough estimate, it was about a 1 to 10 ratio. For every 10 fixed stockers they made, they would make one folder. But Afghanistan kind of proved the utility of a folding stock, plus this new design with the hinge really worked out well. So by the late 80s, the ratio had shifted to as high as 1 in 5, maybe not quite that high, but it's in that thing. My point is they increased AKS production. Something else. Your standard 74 had no real way to mount an optic. Russia basically ripped off the British Suit scope for day use, and they did have night vision. We've covered the AKML in past videos. They did make a smaller number of N models like AK74N or AKS74N with the side rail. This was not standard. I do not know the production ratio. It was not that high. But once more, modernization, the war in Afghanistan and elsewhere, did show them the use of optics. It still wasn't near as common as it would be later on, but it was a thing that appeared. So there were 4 general sub-variants in the AK74 family in production, with Izhmash after the fall being the primary producer. They made about 5 million in total. The only official export, at least licensed producers, were East Germany, which of course would end in 1989, and Bulgaria, which these guns are from, which would not just pivot away from 5.45 in the 90s, but even stamped receivers going back to milled. All the other producers of 5.45 guns, they did it without a license. Like, for example, Poland, Romania, China, North Korea. So that's kind of where we're at. 1991, the Soviet Union shakes, wiggles, stumbles, and eventually, well, to be fair, it's about as bloodless of a coup as we could hope for. Certainly a better transition than what we saw in 1917, 1918 with the Bolsheviks. So, credit where credit's due there. And these were the standard issue guns, and they had tons of them. But they also learned a ton from a decade of fighting in Afghanistan. Tomorrow's the first day of hunting season, and I'm wearing shorts. You're also going to hear noise, including my brother driving around checking game cameras. Anyway, as I said, it was a transition, and it really starts in the mid-'80s. Like we mentioned last time, they went from the wood to the so-called plum furniture, which I still maintain was more or less a dye accident, or at least it was just kind of the dye they were using at the time. Started off actually with the mags. They and the pistol grips would be a shiny color, and then the handguard and other furniture, we would go to matte pretty quickly. The earliest examples you see are 84 in testing, and then 85 to 89, 90. They're gradually filtered in, along with the updated mags. They're lighter, easier to make, a little more durable. And as we pointed out last time, the AK-74 just inherited the second pattern bayonet from the AKM, the 6H4 or 6X4 if you prefer. My thing always comes undone there. Strap. It's actually kind of good it did it. It will show you a reason why that got removed. This one never stays on right. Hook's on good though. But yeah, they basically went to this steel pommel because they were having trouble. And Russia originally made these out of forged parts. Later they would go to cast parts throughout the 70s and 80s to cheapen up production. They work as a wire cutter. But in 1986, the first pattern of the 6H5, 6X5 appears. This is often called the AK74 bayonet. Although to me, it actually reminds me of an AK74M bayonet, because by the time this version was ready to go, that's kind of what was in production. With the new polymer being used, they went to polymer scabbard and grip. Now, the original ones were plum. Scabbard is pretty much like this, although the original grip was a little different. It had more aggressive finger ridges. Honestly, between 86 and 89, there were like 4 different versions. They changed this and that. Notice we're back to a one-piece grip, but with the newer polymer, they felt it was strong enough. They got rid of that silly strap. They just made it a more patterned grip. The scabbard doesn't change much, although originally it did. The first version, they did away with the window in the blade for the wire cutter, so this was different. They went to this, as my notes say, weird system. It's kind of a slidey system. Look it up if you're not familiar. It's weird and only lasted a year and a half. Very different grip, very different blade too, as you can tell. The new one is a little bit more slender. It's also not quite half an inch longer. It goes away from kind of that clip point, hook point, just a straight spear type. Has a newer type of material. The original ones were phosphated. This is more of a dull stainless, kind of a bead blasted stainless. I think they're very attractive. So yeah, The first versions were a little different, but generally this pattern appeared in 86, 87, and was for the AK74 originally, and it will work on them. And my bayonet here is not Russian. It's actually pretty hard to find a Russian 6H5. It's Bulgarian. Bulgaria was the only nation to make these besides Russia. And when I picked this up years ago, it was actually during the assault weapons ban, so people weren't buying AK bayonets. For one thing, AKs just weren't popular yet. For another, well, guns didn't have bayonet lugs. So I got this from K-Bar unissued for like 20 bucks. And then later on, some of the like Waffen Works and other kit builds were coming with bayonets, including some plum ones. I really should have kept one, but who knew the future, you know? So the bayonets change, the furniture's changing. In 88, 89, they make a few small manufacturing changes. For example, they quit fluting the piston head. I think it was mostly just to save time. And they found a few other ways to save weight. They also went to more cast parts. But they really were still working with the furniture and the whole muzzle device area. That seems to be where they were focusing in on quite a bit. Like I said, during the war, there were 4 basic versions: fixed folder, with and without rail. And they, tried to issue to who needed them and whatnot. And that was good. I mean, this is a good folding stock. It's relatively easy to make, but it is a proprietary receiver. You can't transition from one to the other. The rear trunnion and the receiver angle, it's all different. You got this reinforcing plate here. It's one reason that these Bulgarians are great for what they are. And then, of course, after the war, they reevaluate what's going on. They see what worked, what didn't. The USSR goes away. Izhess becomes Izhmash, tries to become a private company, quote unquote. And they look of ways to save money, but also deliver a better gun that can be faster, easier to produce, but also address some of the issues witnessed in the war. They're looking for a one-size-fits-all solution, and frankly, they nailed it. Well, last time we put a Bakelite in the plum, so this time let's put a plum shiny in the true black matte, and we'll even make sure it's a Tula, just because. The Russians never really cared about mixing and matching, not just mags, but even furniture. Wood, plum, black, it's all good. Successful. I've had better luck out of the Wolf 545 in the past versus the Bear. Sometimes, I think it's a Silver Bear, the projectiles seem to stick out just a fraction of a millimeter further than the Wolf or 7 and 6. And in some mags, especially larger, longer ones, that has kind of drug on the front face. So just always kind of felt Wolf was the best ticket. I've been buying it since I first bought a 545 gun in 2002. Now we're back here. What they came up with was officially adopted in 1991 under the GRA index of 6P34. But, well, as you'll see, there were quite a few changes still to come. At first glance, this looks a lot like a polymer AK74. And that's really all it was. In fact, they serve alongside, and it uses the same 545 cartridge. Now, as I mentioned, in 1987, they did update the 7 and 6 to the 7 and 6 M1, going from a mild steel to a hardened steel penetrator. But otherwise, it's the same projectile. But they integrated a lot of the features from the AKS and the N models. In fact, they became standard. For example, the side rail. Instead of just having rails on special models, this is now just the norm. And it is an updated rail, too. It's made a little faster to produce since they're going to make so many. But it's also a little sturdier, too. Again, because it's going to be in all the guns. One of the first areas they looked at, though, was here. In 1989 into 1990, they were working to improve the front sight base and the muzzle brake. In 1990, the earliest versions of the long collar brake and long collar front sight base appear. Basically, that 24mm thread's still here, but now it's extended out further. And this is good. It stabilizes the brake more, just more to connect with. It's better. And of course it needs, you can put a long collar muzzle brake onto a short collar front sight base, but you can't put a short collar muzzle brake onto a long collar front sight base because it'll stick in too far. It's also a two-piece design. This is a Russian one. And this particular long collar two-piece pattern was only ever made in Russia or, you know, in under license in places like Venezuela. They also went to different types of lightning cuts soon thereafter on the front sight base. They also changed the way they machined the gas block. Even the barrel profile is ever so slightly different. Another change that appears around 1990 into 91 is the smooth top cover. They go away from the rib cover to the smooth. As you can imagine, that's easier to manufacture. The reason they ribbed it was for strength. Well, they kind of took the RPK route and just made it out of thicker gauge steel. Another element tried out first in 1990 and then went into actual production in 91, the furniture. This is the true black stuff. Now you might think, oh, they just took the same material and changed the dye. Not exactly. It is a new mix. It's a PA6 thermoplast. It's kind of a nylon material. It is true black, but they changed the mixture quite a bit. It was just more durable, dependable, consistent. Still has a heat shield inside. The pistol grip would go to it, as would the stock. And of course, the stock is one of the other major important updates. You get all the benefits of a fixed stock, even the lightning cut, the cleaning kit compartment. I remember before this pattern was available in America, just that whole idea seemed super cool. And it's even cut out, of course, for the rail. Now, I should mention that when this first appeared in 1991, it still used the 4.5mm pin like the AKS74. In fact, this whole thing started off as an update of the AKS74 called the AKS74M. It's just they decided that there was no reason to have an AK74M and an AKS74M. They dropped the fixed stock pattern and just became the AK74M. As far as the rail, it was standardized, but if an optic were attached, then it would become the AK74MN. The gun itself wouldn't change, but if you saw that on the paperwork, you knew that there was an optic. And to designate exactly what was on there, there would be a dash and then a number, -1, -2, so on and so forth. Now, like I said, this started off as the same hinge pin, but very soon, by 1992, they would go to the reinforced 5.5mm pin, a little thicker, a little better. But it's not just that. They also ever so slightly changed the angle of the trunnion and receiver back here to improve matters a bit more. This is why you really can't interchange stocks or just drill out holes. It just doesn't work right. Now, full disclosure, one of the small nitpicks that the SGL 3194 had, there's no reinforcing plate above the grip. Originally, it should have it. Some guys will go to the trouble of installing one. It's a big pain. I never did. Your mileage may vary. You'll notice this isn't holding a mag. Funnily enough, and probably just because they had so many, in the beginning, the first AK74Ms were still seen with the basically plumb mags. But around 1992, the true black mags appear. I have to admit, too, being able to just push a button versus reach inside your stock is a better way. And then when it's deployed, you essentially get a stock that feels the same as a fixer. Yeah, it's a very nice, comfortable gun to shoot for whatever reason. So now we're all black. We're still using a lot of leftover gear like slings and mag pouches from the Afghan war period, whatever else. So are they done with their changes? They've adopted it. Well, this is what Russia tends to do. They'll make a big thing about adopting something new, but they've got so many of the old thing, it takes them a while to kind of get things going. We saw it with the AKM, the AK74. The first couple of years, production's pretty low. And that gives them time to implement changes. For example, in 1994, they added what we know as the bump rivet here, this little flat rivet. This is actually for the bolt. It helps the bolt rotate home and is intended as kind of a wear point to save wear on your actual trunnion, still a forged trunnion. And that way, if it does wear down, you just replace a rivet. Now, a lot of the other parts by this point are cast, including our bolt carrier. They did slightly revise the bolt and bolt carrier to try to streamline production. Some sources say they're lighter weight too. Take it as you will. Another change that at least appears intermittently, they went from the pinned on barrel hardware, gas block, front sight base, to the dimple pressed ones. Basically, yeah, you put it on the barrel and you just, on the sides here, there are a couple of dimples. We'll see that in just a minute on another gun. And that's great. It's simple, it's easy, it saves pins. It sucks if you ever need to replace the parts though. Basically, you have to drill out your part, it's wrecked, and if you over penetrate and go into your barrel, it's wrecked. The SGL-31s having the old style pin-on hardware, I am totally fine with, even if it was kind of something mandated by the imports. The retainer here, it's also a cast part. Still have the same style of rear sight. Safety does change a bit. The receiver gets a little bit different of a deal. By and large, all of this series were folders. There were a few special runs of fixed stocks for various things. And we have one more element that actually appeared quite late as 1998, some say even 2000. This, the spring-loaded retaining latch. Originally, there was just a little shelf there, like on the 74. This was done to lock it in place for things like grenade launching, because they did attach an underbarrel launcher, sometimes the GP25, sometimes the GP30 under here. And so, under recoil, they were concerned about that popping off. With true black Mishaco mag. Wolf ammo, I believe it's 60 grain. I will say, I do think this is a more effective break. It seems to be, or maybe just the way the gun is gassed. Could also be the stock. It's definitely more comfortable than the AKS74, the SLR104 FR we looked at last time. At least on par with the AK74 SLR105. I would say maybe even a bit better. Of course, it is a factory gun. Just like everything else, very much inspired by what came before, but just refinements all on there. Goes right on. And again, because of agreements between Russia and America, before 2008, no one ever thought anything like this would ever be available. A folder with the right mags, even a bayonet lug. And we were tickled to death when they were in 7.6239. But when the 5.45s came out, well, just like me, this is what we always wanted, because it is a true semi-automatic version of an AK74M, which at the time was Russia's most modern standard issue gun. This is before the AK-12 and AK-15 and even more modern ones. So that's why it's really cool. As said in the previous video with the wooden Bakelite for the 74, the whole package was a look. Very classic Cold War. This is a look for the modern Russian gun. All black, bayonet. I remember these were featured on Modern Firearms RU, and we never thought we'd get them in America. So it was pretty cool when this slowly evolved over here, over a 2-3 year period to get this exact model. Kind of how it came in Russia. So it was adopted in 91, but you really don't see any heavy use until 94, even later. It was a slow transition as money was available. Izhmash did make the transition over to being a nominally private company, but of course now it's pretty much state-run again under the Kalashnikov concern system. Tula did not. It was basically liquidated, I believe, around 92. Assets went otherwhere. That's actually how some figure that Tula parts appeared in the Arsenal 105s. So it took time. Just because this was the official standard issue doesn't mean that the older guns weren't and still aren't around. Kind of like today, you hear about the AK-12. Great, they talk about it. Most soldiers have AK74Ms or even AK74s. What about the projectile, the 545 itself? Well, in 1992, right as this was going in, they did adopt a new version, the 7 and 10 round. They took that hardened steel penetrator and they extended it more, filling up most of the little cavity in front, making it just a little bit of a heavier projectile. This was done to try to improve light armor penetration, like steel plate, sides of cars, that kind of thing. It's not exactly an AP round. The original 7 and 6M was done to kind of go against body armor and heavy clothing more. This was done more hard target type thing to improve it. That was the initial version. In 94, they updated it a little bit. They didn't change the name. They basically took that steel penetrator and that little bit of cavity left, they filled it with lead just to stabilize it. And that's pretty much the modern round in use today, at least one of them. They did increase the weight from 53 grains to about 56, as we looked at earlier, and the Wolf we've been shooting as a 60 grain kind of vermin round. But yeah, now they did start getting armor piercing rounds like the 7 and 22, 7 and 24, 1998, 1999. These are AP rounds. They do go higher. I think APs start at about 58 grains and go up to like 64. And then in 2013, they do go to what is the modern AP round. Get one more true black in that pouch. So let's try it this way, guys. The true test of how something recoils. Yeah, even that way, kind of 80s style. Pretty good. That modern AP round is known as 7N39, and it's, as far as I know, still used alongside the 7 and 10 modern loading, but I could be wrong. And they have other cartridges and specialty rounds, subsonic for suppressors and training and what have you. I mentioned the cartridges because this is actually why we got so much surplus 7 and 6. Some of it was other nations kind of just dumping the cartridge as they go to 5.56. But Russia themselves were clearing out some older stock from the 70s and 80s to make room for the new rounds. Of course, it really doesn't matter to us now because, like I said, by 2014, there's all the sanctions. Even before that, the ATF had decided that, it's an armor-piercing round for a pistol. Therefore, by established rules going back to the 80s, even the 60s, it's not importable. It's a whole thing, topic for another video, frankly. It sucks. Of course, we can still get commercial ammo. At least we could up until the full-blown Ukraine war started in 2022, and then everything got sanctioned. Should also mention that in 2013, this is when Izhmash is folded into, becomes Kalashnikov concern, part of the whole greater Russian network of factories under Vladimir Putin. So this is the standard. The AK74M replaced the AK74 and AKS74, not to mention all the N models. And it did replace some use of the AKS74U, the little shorty crank. The crank was compact and light, but it overheated, it had issues, it had its own weird production things. Nevertheless, with the success of the AK-74, what collectors kind of refer to as the AK-100 series or Century series kicks off in 1994. And the most famous example would be the AK-103, which we did get the SGL 2194 a little bit, and we had the Kalashnikov USA KR-103, which was a great gun for that purpose. The AK-103 was essentially this gun, but instead of being a 545x39, it was in 7.62x39. Had the folding stock, the 16-inch, 415 millimeter barrel. It had this style of break, but just enlarged. It was written on there, and it used this style of mag, just enlarged for 7.62x39, as you would imagine. And Russia did purchase some of these starting around 2000 for special uses by the government and the military with the GRA designation of 6P45. There was also the AK-101, which was meant for export, which was this gun in 5.56. So it's actually very, very similar to this, cartridge caliber and all that included, using a lot of the same components. So that's really what Izhmash tried to do, was a whole family for both domestic and export use. And they did find some success. You can go on Wikipedia and see who bought one version or another, or who even got a license to make these, like Venezuela, India, Azerbaijan, other places. So it was a commercial success and a good money maker. Now you might wonder how many 74Ms were made. We don't know. Technically, they're still in production, although I doubt they're ordering new ones with the AK-12. 2 to 3 million is not a bad estimate, but we really don't know. It's a good gun. The only real trade-off, it's a little bit heavier than the fixed stock AK-74, which is a little under 7 pounds. This is about a little under 7.5 unloaded. It is heavier than the AKS-74, which is around 6.5 pounds, so it's as much as a pound more. But the trade-off is you get a more comfortable stock, you get a rail, a better muzzle brake. Yeah, so that's not a big deal. But folded up, it's still a little over 27 inches. That won't completely replace all the cranks. Again, in 1994, desiring to make a whole family, Izhmash introduces a carbine version in all three calibers, 5.56, 7.62x39, 5.45x39. And what they basically did, they simply combined the front sight and the gas block and shortened the barrel to 12.5 inches and gave it a conical booster that was like a crank but shorter because it didn't need as big of a chamber. They also reduced the rear sight from 1,000 meters, which had held on since the AKM in 1959, down to 500 meters. I think some might be 400, depending on the contract. I could be wrong, guys. But everything in the back was the same, and that was great. They used the same components, the same length gas system, the same handguards, the same magazines. The only things they had to change were the barrel, which is just a different cut, the gas block, no front sight, so you save some there, and then the muzzle device. And Russia would adopt the 5.45 version, known as AK-105, as the 6P47 by 2001, maybe earlier, but that's the first year I can really find with them using them in service. Again, for special uses. And this really addresses a lot of the issues of the crank. You get a little bit more range. It doesn't tend to overheat, more parts commonality, but it does reduce our weight down to a little over 6.5 pounds again. Our size, it's not as compact but as a crank, but it's still 23, 24 inches with the muzzle brake on there. You're saving some. It's a handy little gun. And there and again, KUSA really did us a favor with the KP104. course, that one is in 7.6239, and I think we all were really hoping they would get around to making a 5.45 version. Now, a lot of people have commented about the KUSA website being up and running again. I'm anxious to see what happens there too, guys. Stay tuned. Now, there, of course, was a 7.6239 version, and still is in Russia, known as the AK104, hence the KP104 name. And, of course, there was a 5.56 version known as the AK102. I don't know if anyone actually bought that one. The 101, the full size, maybe a few, but it's really the 103, 104, 105, and, of course, the 74M here that have been successful in this series. And they did try out the AK-107, AK-108, one's 5.45, one's 5.56. I don't know if there's any takers. What's kind of interesting, it goes back to the bolt balancing recoil system from the SA-006, the Konstantinov, that went up against the AK, or A3, I should say, in the early 70s, and was visited with the ridiculous but also cool AN-94. Again, this is something that Izhmash Kalashnikov worked on, but I don't know that there were many takers, because obviously it led to the AK-12 and AK-15 and AK-19, and they seem to have kind of dropped that system and gone a different direction. But it goes to show you the innovation there at work. But this is still, at least the full auto version, pretty much the cutting-edge modern gun in Russian service today as they invade and illegally occupy Ukraine. But it's not alone. This was always a family, always meant to be. It's finally time to talk about it. The big brother from a different factory, from Molot. Definitely deserves to be dusted off. And I did double check where Colton did. That is 60 grain wolf we're using. What do you know? A Viper works. We come to it finally. The RPK74M, the 6P39. Today from Molot. But we need to backtrack a bit, because this gun was there from the beginning. And frankly, there are far fewer changes from the RPK74 to the RPK74M compared with the AK74 to the AK74M. Back in the 1960s, the Central Design and Development Institute there, the whole program set up to develop the small caliber projectile and all that, they were always tasked with making the projectile sure, but also a family of small arms to use it. Yes, a fixed folding stock rifle, but also a series of light machine guns. And I'm not going to go too deep into the RPK because I already did a full-length video earlier this year, but essentially it was designed as a companion to the Kalashnikov, using many of the same parts, just with a longer 23-inch barrel, giving an overall length of just about 41 inches. And it was light at about 11 pounds compared to the previous RPD, which was over 16 pounds. And it used detachable box mags. Of course, it was closed bolt, not open. Pros and cons to that with accuracy. Came with a bipod. It was designed at ISHS, but production was transferred over to the machine tool building plant at Kirov by 1960, 1961 to kind of spread out production. ISHS had a lot of things going on. The Kirov plant, later to be renamed Molot, had expertise in cannons, machine guns, so it made sense. And they were making the fixed stock RPK early on. But Russia was kind of a leader in airborne with the VDB. And they had vehicles, they had the BMP armored vehicle, quite famous, and they had its airborne counterpart, the BMD. For those troops, in 1963, Molot introduced the RPKS folding stock model. And by 65, it was in production. They never made that many, maybe 50,000 out of a total production of, 300,000 RPK-type guns we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. But either way, it goes to show you the ratio, that they were folders and fixed and all that in 7.6239. And they were pretty popular with other nations, although only ever made under license, I think, in Romania. Everyone else did a derivative. But of course, when the 5.45 cartridge was adopted, they would obviously go to a light machine gun chairman for it. And once the A3 beat out the SA006, it became clear that we were just going to basically take the RPK at Molot and rechamber it for the new round. And it was adopted at the exact same time in 1974 as the AK74 and AKS74 under the GRA designation of 6P18 for the fixed stock and 6P19 for the folding stock version. And these originally would have wood, and yes, it did have a wood folding stock, which is pretty cool. And it really used the same mechanism we see here on this model. The benefits of the double hook sling are quite apparent when you have the stock folded and then go to unfold it. Folds to the side, but of course, instead of having that button up there, we've got a latch back here. A system that has really been in use a lot since the original RPKS. This is literally the same lever here. It just kind of is a 90-degree bend in there. And keep on off-handed for a minute. Heck, it's an RPK. Yep. Not much more to say there. Really, the only difference is still had this internal release that you reached in here to fold after you get out of a jump. But the original RPKS and RPKS74s did not have this latch here. You use this hole, flip around here, bullet tip to fold your stock, because they wanted it to be a quick deploy, but they did not want the stock to fold up on them in an accident. So yeah, originally you had to use a bullet tip to fold your stock, and that would hang around for a good long time. But yeah, basically the RPK74 was the same as the RPK, and they added a birdcage flash hider. Now the RPK always had threads, but usually had a muzzle nut. That's really it, guys. Past Misha interrupting future Misha here. I did not take this out to the cabin because, well, it's going to shoot the same as the Vepr. And, you know, RPKs are kind of heavy to pack up, and we had enough stuff hoofing out there. We loaded up J-Ro's car literally to the max. In fact, we had to turn in all-wheel drive. What was I saying? Oh yeah, guns. So this gives me a chance to show you the 6P18 fixed stock here. Originally, just like with the original RPK, the RPK74 came in laminated wood, but in the mid-80s they would transition over to plum. This is original Russian plum. Bulgaria never did make plum. And Russian and Bulgarian wood are very similar, but Bulgarian tends to be a little more blonde brown, whereas Russian is more red brown, says the blind guy. Technically, this is the N variant, because it has the side rail, and this is a vector build on a Nodak receiver, complete with the original style mag. I do not have the corresponding plum because they've always been kind of spendy, because they only made the extended plums for just a couple of years and you just don't see them in America. Heck, these are hard enough to find. Here is its style of flash hider collar. If you can't tell the difference, don't worry, you're not wrong. The difference is really internal. They just made the M's a little bit thinner from the inside just so the bullet would not impact. This is a pretty tight fit in here as it is. So this is the original version here with the fixed stalker, trapdoor, of course, and it does have the RPK sling with the pad. Same type of sling as you're used to, just a little bit longer. And this pad can fit on any of them, including the double hooker. This one isn't, but there you go. Of course, standard AK-74, AK-74M mags will fit in the RPK-74M just fine. And since, last time we did a plum and a black, and before that a bakelite and a plum, yeah, we'll do a short mag in the Vepr. And what's nice is with the standard mag, it's close, but it does not quite touch and monopod this way. A short time after Izhmash introduced the AK-74M, Molot, now that's their official, post-Soviet name, would introduce this version here. I think around 1994, at least in reality. Some sources put it a little earlier. They did the same thing. They went from the plum furniture to the PA6 nylon, the true black. And they standardized the folding stock. Essentially, it's the exact same as a RPK-74, just has the updated furniture. And they made the rail standard. Again, there was always an RPK-N, RPK-74N. I think you get it. Not much else changed. Okay, this pistol grip's a modern Molot grip. A lot of them you see just have the standard grip, but my gun, my choice. There were a little bit of tweaks to the bipod over time too. And with the M version, they would go to a slightly thin wall flash hider versus a slightly thicker one early on. It's externally, you can't even tell. Internally, it's just a little bit opened up, probably just for the newer AP rounds and stuff that we're using, bullet deflection. It happens. The bipod would change just a little bit over the production, but here and here we do have those dimpled components I mentioned a minute ago. Izhmash would introduce dimpled hardware, and Molot would use them too. So it's great as long as you don't need to remove these things. And that actually explains, sorry I hit you there, that actually explains why the front sight base on the RPK-74M remains pinned on. This is a component you're going to need to remove, at least it's a very high probability, because there's no other way to get to the bipod collar to pull it off. So as far as I know, yeah, these are pinned on even on the military guns, just for access to that component. I don't know why when they weren't modernizing it, they didn't go to a QD system kind of like Romania did with their late style RPKs. A little bit of criticism there, but they were just sticking to what worked. And I should also mention that while Izhmash went to a lot of cast components, rear trunnions, bolt groups, they went to the wire style, recoil rod. The Molot factory kept on with forged parts because they're making a light machine gun. The rear trunnion's still forged. It uses the original tube machined style recoil system. It still has a forged bolt carrier. The bolts were always forged, even in the Izhmash production. Forged trunnion. I believe the rear sight's still forged. Yeah, they just didn't do it like Izhmash. They also use a little bit more of a matte finish. The AK-74M has an updated version of the paint over phosphate finish that we saw all the way back with the AK-M. It was slightly updated with the 74, updated again there. Molot seems to use the older style where it's more of a matte paint over phosphate. Still a 1.5 mil receiver. Yes, a non-dimpled magwell is correct. So that's neat too. And a 45-degree gas block is correct. It's funny how Izhmash, Izhsk made changes to the AKM, to the AK-74 pretty regularly. Molot didn't. They didn't change. I've got an early RPK, and even setting it side by side with this one, there's not a lot of difference. That's actually why I didn't bring out my plum RPK-74 fixed stalker to the cabin. It just didn't seem worth the bulk bringing it out when it's identical. The only differences are the folding stock And that one even has the rail, so you don't even lose that. And speaking of, what about the dimensions? Overall, because of the new flash hider, it's about an inch longer than the RPK, a little under 42 overall. Of course, you fold the stock in, you take about 9 inches off. When they went from wood to polymer furniture, that saved a little weight. But with the M version, when they added this whole folding mechanism and metal back here, this is not light, and the rail, and they slightly beefed up the bipod collar, that added weight back. And I believe this is actually a little bit heavier than the RPK. I believe it's about 11.5 pounds unloaded, give or take. Still has the 23 1/4 barrel though, 14 millimeter threads. They'd never went to 24. And Molot, like Izhmash, this was part of a family, sometimes called the RPK 200 family. Although they didn't see near the success that their little brother did. They offered a version known as the RPK 203 and 762x39, sometimes called the RPKM. We did get a version of that imported as the Vepr FM RPK47. Very few takers, as far as I know, if any. They did a 5.56 version as the RPK 201, which we got imported years ago thanks to Royal Tiger. Never thought I'd say those words. IO. Is the Vepr 1V. That was the whole thing. Those were really cool back when they came in. And I don't think anyone except the island of Fiji ever bought any. I could be wrong. Yeah, it was this model here, the 545 for Russia. So while the AK Century series, 100 series was popular, not many takers on the light machine gun version, but that's okay because the Russian military bought these, again, for airborne units. They also used them in armored vehicles. The folding stock model became quite popular. We don't know production. It seems like between the RPK74 and the RPK74M and RPKS74, because they're so similar, there's no real distinction. Over 500,000 were made, under 1 million, but so probably more all told than the original RPK in Russia. But then again, they've been in production longer, so that makes perfect sense. All right, let's go to the bipod now that it is getting warm. This table is not the best base for working with bipods on, but let's see what we can do here. I wanted to show you how it still does the old monopoding thing, like the original RPK. Of course, that's just when you're not holding it. It's fine when you do. Actually, it'd probably be better to hold it this way. Yep, it works. In 2017, after Russia had gone into Crimea and started, these were very common. You started to see them, of course, deployed on the squad level. They were in armored vehicles. And in 2020, there was the RPK-16 that seemed to kind of come around to replace some, and there's been future developments. And I should just mention, because the original video just got not just demonetized, the one I put out like in 2018, but removed by YouTube, even though it's been up for years. Yeah, when Izhmash got sanctioned in 2014, we still got Molots because they were not considered state-controlled, state-adjacent yet. They were still considered a private company. Well, that would last until June of 2017, so just after 3 years of the first ban, then Molots get added onto the list, and that's why very few of these made it over before that sanction get knocked on. Sad, but at least we did get quite a few Veprs over the years, too. Molot never sent as many over as Izhmash because smaller factory, but there you go. And who knows if we'll see either one ever again. And with that, let's move inside so we can kind of spread this out on the table, the compare and contrast, and talk more about U.S. imports. Again, since they took that video down, why not? the 545 projectile in America, and just some fun stories and thoughts that I have since we're out here. Also, thank goodness it's cooler today and the bugs seem to be less active. When I was doing the 74 video, they were driving me nuts. And just for comparison, I'll hold it more traditional like this. I would say the forward grip is better for controlling recoil, but the rear grip gives you more fine adjustment for aiming at range. At least it would if someone has working eyes. But both options are there. That's kind of what makes the RPK line so fun. Let's move in where I can lay this big old chunk on the table, put it on its bipod. A few final thoughts. As you've seen, you know, it has the extended mag. Obviously, the true black versions of these came out at the same time. They did have a plum version. They're pretty uncommon. I don't think they were made for that many years. They have this, you see them often called waffle, but it's not. It's just basically horizontal ribbing. And of course, originally before that, they used the extended Bakelite mags, the AG4S types. Monoponing at its finest. As I'm sure you know, that they tried out a drum for this 545, the 74, the kind of pancake style. In the end, they just decided to take advantage of the lighter weight, the capacity, and just issue 2 extended 4-cell pouches per gunner. And of course, they can use standard Kalashnikov 74 mags too. Now, in more recent times, the so-called Casket magazine, the Quad Stack 60, has appeared. That was designed at Izhmash Kalashnikov concern, but they didn't make that many. And Puff Gun made some, and we've had those. I didn't bring them out this time. They were officially adopted. They got a GRAW number and everything, but I don't think the Russian military ever got that many. You don't often see them in the RPK74M. There's a lot of photos out there of them with the AK-12, but even then, I don't think that many were ever picked up. No, the mag here is still the standard for the RPK as far as the Russian military is concerned. One more mag is ready to go from that pouch. These were, at least in certain instances, designed for relatively precision shots at longer ranges than a standard AK could do. That was certainly one of their aspects. Time displaced Misha again, since I'm here. Here is the quad stack. Well, Izhmash made some. This one is Puff Gun, which is about the only ones we've ever had in America. This is the metal tab one. And the system is pretty cool. You would expect a quad stack to be kind of complicated, but this follower, although it comes up to a double feed, it does spread out as it comes down. It only has one spring. They're pretty simple inside, but of course still more complicated than a regular mag. Comes apart the same way. Even tops off with the stripper clip guide. But I will share more about my experience with the puff guns in the next video. However, they were meant for auto fire. There we go. They like that. As far as pouches are concerned for the AK-74, AKS-74, RPK-74, RPKS-74 series, these are at least some of the ones I have out here at the cabin. And the original ones were pretty much repurposed late AKM. It has a pocket on each side, one large for an oiler, one small for a cleaning kit. It holds 3 mags. That's why I keep my Bakelites in this one. For some reason, all my Bakelites are Mishaco. I'm a toolless. But what they did on the strap, you'll see 2 buttonholes. The top one is for 74 545 mags. The bottom one, if you were to use it, would be for 7.62 39 AKM mags. This 3-cell pouch in general came into use with the late milled AKs and persisted on. It's pretty lightweight. Here we have one that was kind of custom for the 74. Got a large side pocket with 2 internal pockets, divider there. You can put whatever, oiler. It's separate there. Notice there's only 1 buttonhole. There are versions of this that have 2 for both styles. It holds 4 mags. And then here, where the strap is, you have, should actually have 4 of these, but I just have 3 in this one. But it's got the clips and the guide, new equipment for the 74. And frankly, Russian, Bulgarian, when you get to these pouches, I have a hard time telling them apart. Some are easier than others, but a lot of the ones actually sold as Bulgarian probably originated in Russia, because a lot of Bulgaria's 545 equipment came from Russia. Moving down the row, we have kind of a 80s, 90s style pouch, back to a 3-cell here, and interestingly back to a single slim pocket on this side. Still has belt loops, kind of a different material. This one has a pebble grain to the leather tab. Holds 3 mags in it. This has Tula shinies. And the button closure is quite interesting. It's rather sharp. And there's just 1 hole. Then I have a variation of that here that has smooth leather. Otherwise, pretty well the same. I keep my true blacks in it, but to be fair, it's, yeah, I'm sure these were used with the 74Ms. It's not the newest style belt pouches, belt loops, excuse me. You know, these all have them too. These are a little bit of a different weave. And then, finally, a true Russian RPK74 pouch. It does have 2 closure holes. It's on the bottom one right now because we were using it, but it's a bit of a stretch, pun intended. She can absolutely do it. The truth is, the RPK74 mag is actually a little bit longer than the RPK mag because it holds 5 extra rounds, and it's not quite as curved. So in this one, it's the reverse of the others, where you typically would want to use the bottom hole, but they're pretty close together. One thing that's kind of interesting, this style does not have the front pocket. Of course, on the back we've got belt loop straps, and then we have a shoulder strap that's heavy duty and very adjustable. I like these shoulder straps. And typically, an LMG gunner would get 2 of these pouches filled up, and then his supporter would carry extra ammo or clips and, you know, keep him topped off. These aren't all the pouches, but, you know, the ones I had with me today, and pretty good representative. And of course, color can range from green to almost gold to tan, and you can kind of tell the era it was made in based on just how green or gold it was. At least some people can. I can't, for reasons. And here it is in the Vepr. And speaking of next video, by the way, one kind of neat feature with the M is the stock will fold, just barely, but it will, with the puffer in there. It does stick out just a little bit, but it doesn't really hang down much further than a standard mag, so monopoding is less of a concern. So here's what we're going to do. I viewed the footage I had, and this was either going to be an extra long video, even compared to the first one, or I was going to break it into two. So what I'm going to do is break it into two, making a third part. This one, as you've seen, is on the AK74M, RPK74, RPK74M. Cool. More from a military standpoint with shooting. Part 3 is going to talk about, as I promised at the very beginning, the 5.45 bullet in America. Does it have a future? If so, what is it? And also 5.45 chambered firearms in America, specifically imports like this Vepr and that Saiga, and just more civilian ownership. And I'm going to share some stories like selling these puff guns, and it's pretty funny how I kind of got into moving these and bought a couple of cases of them and was selling them for years. So yeah, I thought we'll just do 3 videos. Heck, if I'm going to be firing off valuable 5.45 ammo that I can't easily replace, we're going to get our money's worth. And you guys seem to like video 1 when I'm recording this outro, I guess you'd call it. It's already been up, so yeah, that's the plan. So stay tuned for that. As always, if you could, please like, share, and subscribe. Definitely do comment. That helps a heck of a lot on YouTube. If you'd like to support the channel so I can replace 5.45 ammo, check out Patreon. Or you can do a super thanks here on YouTube. I will say that, yeah, I know YouTube takes a lick, but you know what? I'd rather have a percentage of something than a percentage of nothing. So if it's between no super thanks at all or super thanks and YouTube getting their cut, I really don't mind YouTube getting their cut. So whichever way you're comfortable with, because I know some folks don't do Patreon. But hope you've enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun making these videos, something I've been kind of planning all summer. Like I said, we had to load down Jiro's rig to the max, so part of this will be paying the gas to him and possibly new shocks, because we had a lot to take out that day. But with that, until part 3, Peanut and I will see you next time.